Nones. We got to spell it because it's not the church ladies, the Catholic church ladies. These are Nones. These are people who we identify as atheist, agnostic, or they describe their religious faith as nothing in particular. They used to be sort of a sideline of American religion. In the 1970s, about 1 in 20 American adults were nuns. There was actually scholarship in the 1960s that called them the neglected category, meaning we weren't even thinking about them because they were so small. From that point forward, we've seen growth. In 1972, it was 5% of America. In 1990, it was 7% of Americans were nuns. But from that 1991 figure, it just exploded. And then every year, or every 2 years, the nuns would rise by 1 or 2 percentage points. So today, about 30% of American adults claim no religious affiliation. Amongst Generation Z, it's over 40% claim no religious affiliation. We are seeing the wholesale decline of some of the most significant denominations in American history right now. The United Methodist Church, the Episcopal Church, even the Southern Baptist Convention's losing hundreds of thousands of members every year. And the share of Americans who are atheists is now 6%, and 6% are agnostic. And an even bigger share, about 20% or more, say they have no religion in particular. I think it's the largest cultural shift in the last 50 years, and it's going to radically remake every institution in American life, culture, politics, society, charity, you name it. And it's going to be touched in one way or another by the meteoric rise of the nuns. I wish that I could point to a single reason why the nuns have risen so quickly. It's a whole cornucopia of reasons, and not every two people have the same reason. I try to point out in the book some major pathways that led to the nuns rising. One is just simple secularization theory, which is one of the oldest theories in sociology of religion, which basically argues that as society becomes more educationally advanced and economically prosperous, it becomes less religious. And we can see that in Western Europe, places like Spain, places like France, places like Germany. Less than 10% of those people go to church every week. In Scandinavia, it's even lower. Denmark, Finland, Sweden, it's less than 5% of people go to church every Sunday. And secularization theorists would point to that and go, look what happened. They got capitalism, their economy grew, they got educated, and they don't need God anymore. So they left religion behind. The bigger question is, why did it take so long in America? You know, it should have been here 30 or 40 years ago. Why did it only rise in the 1990s? So that's one big reason. Another is politics. I don't think we can discount the role of politics in American life. We're seeing the Democrats are more and more becoming the party of non-religious people. In 2020, 45% of all voters for Joe Biden were atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular. There's a very real possibility in the 2024 election, half of all Biden voters will be nuns. Amongst the Republicans, it's only 12%. So more and more Americans are feeling like to be religious is to be Republican, especially if you're white, and to be non-religious is to be a Democrat. So I think politics has sort of driven a wedge in American religion. And then, you know, we can't discount the role the internet's played in the lives of so many people. I think about someone who was born an atheist in Mississippi in 1950. They might be born and die and never tell a single soul they don't believe in God, because if they did, they could lose their job. They could lose their spouse. They could lose their family. They could lose their friends because there's so much stigma. But now you can go on the internet and find an Atheist of Mississippi Facebook group or a subreddit or some kind of online community that makes you feel like you're not alone. And so when you're asked on surveys what you are, you're much more willing to say what you really are instead of saying you're a Christian just because you don't want to be ostracized by your community. Those are just 3 reasons, but there are probably 6 or 8 more primary reasons why people left religion over the last 50 years. Whenever I bring up these statistics about the rise of the nuns and the decline of denominations and all these sort of negative numbers about the trajectory of American religion, you almost get 2 different answers to the reason why these things are happening. And some pastors will say, well, my church needs to become more orthodox and more conservative. We need to become more strident in what we believe, and that will bring more people in because we'll stand apart from the world. And then other pastors say, you know what, we need to go to the left. We need to be more inclusive of LGBTQ. We need to become more politically active towards liberal causes and things like immigration and abortion. What's interesting is we're seeing both conservative denominations like the Southern Baptist Convention decline. They've lost 1.3 million members in the last 3 years. But we're also seeing liberal denominations decline like the Episcopal Church, the Presbyterian Church USA at the same time. So it doesn't seem like anyone has a sort of a silver bullet to reverse the overall trends away from American religion, especially American Christianity. Donald Trump is in many ways, on the surface, seems like the worst possible candidate for Christians to follow, but underneath the surface actually might be the ideal candidate. And what I mean by that is the Republicans have elected evangelical presidents before. George W. Bush was an evangelical. He had a born again experience, and he used to be an alcoholic, stopped drinking, really kind of reformed his life after that experience. And he was not able to overturn Roe versus Wade. And he really didn't do a whole lot for religious freedom for evangelicals. They kind of saw him as a letdown and a disappointment because he was a man with principles. Donald Trump is not a man with principles. He's an empty vessel. He's a transactional person, which means if you give me your vote, I will give you what you want from a policy perspective. And we could see that on the issue of abortion. Donald Trump is in no way an active Christian in any meaningful sense of the word. But evangelicals came to him in large numbers and said, we will vote for you if you give us what we want, and we want an end to Roe versus Wade. And they voted for him, and he ended Roe versus Wade. If you think of it in pure transactional terms, it makes much more sense. The ends justify the means. And what a lot of evangelicals will tell you is we're not voting for a pastor in chief. We're voting for a commander in chief, a president in chief who does something for us tangibly. And while they like a guy like George W. Bush more from a moralistic perspective, they don't like him from a policy perspective. Donald Trump got tangible wins for evangelicals, and the ends justify the means for many of them, and they will continue to justify the means because Trump will continue to give them what they want if he becomes the president again. Becoming a trained political scientist has taught me a lot about how to think about my space in the world and what I can control and what I don't have control over. And we often talk in political science specifically about the dichotomy between behavior and institutions. So behavior is how I individually act, what choices I make, my voting behavior, what candidates run, but all that is shaped by institutions. Why don't we have three parties in America? Because our system just does not allow three parties in America. We have agency, but it's limited by the institutional constraints around us. And when I think about American religion, what I realize is, can you be a great pastor in any situation? You can. But is it easier to grow a church in America in the baby boom in the 1950s and 1960s than it is today? It absolutely is. If you look at some of the fastest growing churches in America, you see there are places where people are moving to. Population growth leads to church growth. And where are churches declining? Where people are moving away from, which happens to be most of America right now. So no matter how good you are as a pastor, you've got these institutional constraints on yourself. And right now, American religion is facing a whole lot of headwinds and very few tailwinds. A lot of things are disadvantageous for Christians in America right now, and very few things are advantageous. 60 or 70 years ago, it was the opposite. Everything was pointing towards growth, and now almost everything's pointing toward decline. So being a pastor means pastors can do their very best, but still not see growth because of the larger institutional constraints of American society right now.